The spit hit the floor before anyone had time to react. A small, ugly sound in an otherwise ordinary afternoon. And in that instant, the entire diner seemed to inhale at once. Plates froze halfway to tables, coffee stopped mid-pour, and an elderly waitress with tired eyes and shaking hands stood stunned, staring at the mess near her shoes, as if she couldn't quite understand how something so cruel could land in her quiet world. Outside the wide front windows, engines rumbled low and steady, shadows of leather and chrome stretching across the parking lot, unseen witnesses to a moment that was about to change far more than one boy's reputation. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that respect still matters in this world, take a second right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a reminder, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this only spread when people who care help carry them forward. The diner sat on the edge of a long highway, the kind of place travelers stopped when they were too tired to keep going, and locals treated like a second living room. The booths were worn smooth by decades of elbows and laughter. The air smelled of coffee, grease, and nostalgia, and the walls held photos of people who had passed through and never quite left. The elderly waitress had worked there longer than most of the customers had been alive. Her hair was thin and silver, pulled back with a clip she'd owned for years, and her uniform had been washed so many times it looked softer than fabric had any right to be. She moved slowly, carefully, because life had taught her that rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes cost people like her more than they cost anyone else. That afternoon had already been heavy on her shoulders. Her feet ached, her back burned with familiar pain, and the tips in her apron were thin, barely enough to cover groceries, let alone the medications she quietly rationed at home. Still, she smiled when she approached tables, because smiling cost nothing and sometimes earned grace in return. She had raised children, buried a husband, and learned to survive without asking for help. Pride was all she had left, and she guarded it fiercely. The rich teen sat in a booth near the window, surrounded by friends who laughed too loudly and treated the diner like a stage built for their amusement. His clothes were expensive in a way that announced itself without shame, his phone always in his hand, his attention scattered between screens and sneers. He had grown up insulated from consequences, wrapped in money and indulgence, taught without words that the world existed to serve him. The diner bored him, the food annoyed him, and the woman who brought his plate registered as little more than furniture. When the mistake happened, it was small and human. The waitress placed the wrong side dish beside his burger, an error born of fatigue, not carelessness. She noticed immediately and reached to correct it, already apologizing in that soft, practiced way of someone who had learned to diffuse anger before it exploded. But the teen's patience had long since run out. Humiliation in his mind was entertainment, and power felt sweetest when exercised over someone who couldn't fight back. The moment stretched thin as his face twisted with disdain. The spit followed, deliberate and public, landing near her feet like a challenge. Laughter bubbled up from his friends, nervous and eager, feeding on the cruelty as if it were a show put on just for them. The waitress felt heat rise to her cheeks, her chest tightening as memories of other insults, other indignities, piled up behind her eyes. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open and swallow her pride along with the mess. Around them, the diner fell into an uncomfortable silence. Some customers looked away, ashamed of their own stillness. Others clenched their jaws, anger flickering behind their eyes but going nowhere. People had bills to pay, lives to protect, and courage often felt like a luxury. The waitress bent slowly, reaching for a rag with hands that trembled despite her efforts to steady them. She told herself to endure, the way she always had, because endurance had kept her alive this long. What the teen didn't know was that the low rumble outside wasn't just traffic passing by. A group of bikers had pulled in minutes earlier, their machines lined up with care, chrome catching the sun. They were road-worn men and women, faces marked by years of wind and weather, jackets heavy with patches earned through loyalty and loss. To outsiders, they looked intimidating, the kind of people others crossed the street to avoid. But inside those jackets were hearts that understood respect in a way money never taught. They had seen everything through the diner's wide windows. They saw the waitress's careful movements, the teen's careless cruelty, the way the room seemed to shrink around her humiliation. For many of them, the waitress looked like someone they had known once, a mother who worked too hard, a grandmother who never complained, a woman who carried the weight of the world quietly so others wouldn't have to. And something in that recognition tightened their chests. Inside, the waitress cleaned the floor with methodical precision, each wipe of the rag a small act of self-preservation. She kept her eyes down, refusing to give the teen the satisfaction of her tears. Her mind drifted to her late husband, to the way he used to squeeze her hand when life got hard, silently reminding her she wasn't alone. She wondered when the world had grown so sharp, so quick to cut people who were already bleeding. The teen leaned back, smugness radiating from him like heat, unaware that the laughter around him sounded thinner now, less confident. His friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something had changed, though they couldn't quite name it. The silence in the diner pressed down harder with each passing second, heavy with unspoken judgment. Then the door opened, and the rumble from outside followed the bikers in like a storm cloud. Boots hit the floor with purpose, leather creaked, and the air seemed to thicken. Conversations died instantly. The bikers didn't rush or shout. They moved with the calm certainty of people who had faced worse than a rude teenager and survived. Their eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene with sharp clarity, landing finally on the waitress as she straightened, trying to regain some shred of dignity. The presence of the bikers shifted the balance of power in a way the teen had never experienced. For the first time, his confidence wavered, not because of fear alone, but because he sensed judgment that couldn't be bought off. These were people who didn't care about his father's name or his bank account. They cared about something older, something simpler, something he had never been taught to value. The waitress felt their presence before she fully saw them. It was in the way the room's energy changed, the way eyes lifted, the way silence sharpened into expectation. She looked up, meeting the gaze of one of the bikers, and for a brief moment she saw understanding there, a quiet assurance that what had happened mattered, that she mattered. It was enough to steady her shaking hands. The bikers took a booth, their movements deliberate, their attention never leaving the teen and his table. They ordered food with polite nods and soft words, treating the waitress with a respect so natural it almost broke her heart. No one raised a voice, no threats were spoken. But the message filled the room all the same. Cruelty had been seen, it had been measured, and it would not be ignored. The teen's friends grew restless, their earlier bravado draining away. One by one, they avoided his eyes, suddenly more interested in their phones, their plates, anywhere but the weight of what they had participated in. The teen himself felt something unfamiliar coil in his stomach. It wasn't just fear. It was shame, creeping in where arrogance had once lived, whispering that perhaps he had crossed a line that couldn't be laughed off. As the bikers ate, they talked quietly among themselves, stories of the road, of people helped and lost along the way. They laughed, but it was a warm sound, inclusive rather than cutting. The contrast between their presence and the teen's earlier behavior was impossible to miss. Other customers began to breathe easier, as if the room itself was healing, tension easing inch by inch. When it came time to pay, one of the bikers stood and walked to the counter, pulling out cash with a steady hand. He left more than enough, covering not just their meals but a generous tip that would ease the waitress's worries for at least a little while. He met her eyes, offering a small nod of respect that spoke volumes. No pity, no condescension, just acknowledgement. The teen watched this exchange, something cracking inside him. For the first time, he saw himself reflected not as powerful or amusing, but as small, petty, and cruel. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shouted reprimand could have been. His friends stood, muttering excuses, eager to leave, suddenly ashamed to be associated with him. One by one, they filed out, leaving him alone in the booth he had once treated like a throne. The waitress returned to her duties, her movements a little steadier now, her heart lighter despite the lingering sting. She had been reminded that goodness still existed, that strangers could become shields, that dignity could be restored even after being trampled. The bikers finished their meals and left as quietly as they had arrived, engines roaring back to life as they pulled onto the highway, carrying their unspoken lesson with them. The teen remained behind, staring at the table, replaying the moment again and again. The spit, the laughter, the silence, the bikers' calm gaze. Something had shifted, a seed planted in uncomfortable soil. Whether it would grow into remorse or harden into resentment was a choice only he could make. But for the first time, the choice was real. The diner returned to its gentle rhythm, plates clinking, coffee flowing, conversations resuming in hushed tones. The waitress paused for a moment, looking out the window at the disappearing bikes, a faint smile touching her lips. She had survived another day, another test of her strength, and she hadn't done it alone. Sometimes justice didn't need shouting or fists. Sometimes it arrived quietly, on two wheels, and left behind a lesson that echoed long after the engines faded. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone who deserves respect, or of a moment when kindness changed everything, please take a moment to like the video, share it, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Before the ending, I have one special request for you. Please comment below and tell us what this story made you feel, because your words might be the ones that encourage someone else today. In a world that often celebrates power over compassion, moments like these remind us that true strength lies in standing up for those who can't always stand up for themselves. And sometimes, the most powerful lesson is delivered without a single word spoken.